Kina semdol ka ke mo fa seda. Fa seda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations podcast about EVE Online. I am Matterall. Welcome to Talking in Stations podcast.
Hey, how's it going,
about
everyone?
EVE Online. I am Matterall. Welcome to here with Elise.
Hey, good morning.
Podcast.
Hey,
And
how's it going,
Sutonia.
everyone?
Online. I am
Hey,
Matterall.
howdy.
Here with Elise.
Hey, good morning.
All right, the four of us are going to talk about this
howdy.
years,
Hey, good
well, actually
morning.
last year's
are going
nominees
to
and
talk
winners
about
of the our award show, which is the most influential. Gotta get a better name for that, but yeah, most influential because we look at the players to see large and small who made a difference that was lasting, and not only who, but what and when, and what mechanics changed and stuff. So we have a few categories we'll go over, and then we'll hit some news, mechanics change and stuff. So we have from around EVE Online, and that's what we're going to do today. You guys ready?
There's an echo.
From around EVE Online, and what's that? That's what we're going to do today.
The chat.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so let's actually talk about other people's shows first, because I thought this was really cool yesterday. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Less Than 10 podcasts, but if you are not familiar with them, and if you are anyone who likes combat in EVE Online, that is a very good show podcast to listen to. But now they actually televised their first show, which was kind of cool. And they did their own little award ceremony called the Nanofiber Awards, which is pretty funny. They called it the Nannies, which is hilarious. So it was nice to see those guys. I can't believe that's the first time they did it, because they actually made it look really easy, and it looked really good. So they'll probably be doing more of that. But the Nanofiber Awards were small gang awards, and these are their categories. They had a favorite CCP dev, or as they called it, the most tolerable CCP dev, and that was Aurora that won that. Congratulations to her. She's new. She's a community dev for CCP, new last year. And she did a lot of, at least, work with the Alliance tournament, did she?
Yeah, it's the EVE-NT Alliance Open. We can't call it the Alliance Tournament, just in case.
Right.
But yeah, she did an incredible amount of work for that, and it was very arduous. I think she regrets signing up for it. She didn't really realize what she was getting into at the start. But she not only stuck it out, but she made it. She actually made it work. So that was incredible. I know thousands of players were really excited to participate in that. So
yeah, now she blasted on the scene doing the CSM horse race when they were making the announcements of the winners. She really that was probably her first big project that was public, and she did a fantastic job illustrating who's winning at every slideshow, every slide moment. So you could see every time somebody dropped out of the race, you could see all their votes go to other people, and she illustrated that in a way that was understandable, which made viewing the winners a real nail biter. That was exciting. So good for her.
She FC'd in Twitch versus Eve too this year.
Yeah, she's been all over the place. Convict, I think, would be my pick for that, because he does the nostalgia Eve stuff, which just, for me, is amazing. And he's...
Go ahead. Finish.
He's a real... I don't know what to call him, a gopher. He like digs down into the basement to find things, and then he'll surface them. And it's stuff that just reminds you of like how long you've been playing EVE Online.
As an RPer, I'm contractually obligated to plug CCP Delegate Zero here. As I've mentioned him quite a few times on this show, that would be my pick. He is basically the lore and storyline dev who generates a lot of content like Flossiswin just by responding to what RPers post on forums and such, and making in-game events happen. It's really cool for people who are into that kind of stuff, like myself.
Yeah, totally. Just vital to your groups and people who are interested in lore. We don't really get a chance to meet him often. I think he's kind of shy. What about you, Sutonia? Do you have a favorite? Elise, Sutonia, do you guys have favorite devs? Or
I mean, there's way too many like devs to.
Yeah. That's why we didn't.
like.
That's why we didn't set this up. We're doing the nanofiber one now, but go ahead.
Because I can easily just name like 10 that I love, and then I'm gonna like think of like another 10 while I'm naming those 10. Like I think I really love CCP, but I'd say like CCP Karka is always awesome. She makes tons of like really cool UI changes, like CCP Rise, CCP Deadlift, CCP Fozzie. Like all of the game design developers are really awesome. So are all of the community devs. So a lot of the art devs. You know, like there's so many good devs. I can't name them all.
You're so right. And Loki that does the scope videos and all that stuff, and the ones that you meet in person too are amazing. Not just the people that get surfaced. Elise.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to copy Sutonia's answer here. It's pretty hard to pick a single one that's like the MVP.
I think that's why we didn't do a dev. Also, we wanted to make it about the players, but go ahead.
A lot of devs are really good, but I think you're both cowardly for not picking one.
All right, let's move on quick before she makes you say something. Okay, so they also did, this is the Nanofiber Awards, again, by Less Than 10 Podcast. You can see their latest episode. They announced the winners. Oh, I guess we're spoiling it. Best Sov to Roman was funny. We won't tell you where that is. Best poster, that's kind of inside game for them. But the best game change, they really liked I thought the Needlejack filaments and they had really good reasons for that. You could listen to the show just for those reasons. I thought that was pretty cool. Then they did the most influential small ganger, and they picked names that I hadn't heard of, but now I'm going to go watch these guys on stream or look for them elsewhere. But they picked AP, which I think is I didn't write down what the name was for, but that's short for name. Three Tiers, Amelia, and Stitch. We know Stitch from running for CSM. Those were the honorable mentions there.
Yeah, AP refers to Aurus Porsalius, I think his name is.
That's right. Yeah. And here's my favorite one. The best podcast guests for negative or less than 10 was Elise Randolph. Yeah, you did it. With Wild Things and Casper. And Casper's a really nice guy. He came and showed us some what was it? The handicap game. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. The game where you basically, before you go into a tournament, you what do you call it? You deny the other team a certain ship. What's that called?
Ban.
Yeah, it is banned, but I don't know if that had a game to it. But anyway, it was a neat little, like, it's almost like a card game for Eve, like I'm going to not let you use those ships. And you're gonna deny me these ships, and then we're gonna go to battle with like what's left. And it was very strategic. So it shows you that side of an Alliance tournament. The bans are actually really, really interesting the way that works. Right?
Yeah, I definitely got carried as a guest on that one. So I'm glad I got to be there for it. But yeah, that entire aspect, the competitive Eve aspect, is interesting. There's so much that goes into it. It's absolutely insane. It's why it's one of my favorite like Eve gameplay styles, because it is the most Eve thing you can do, I feel, in terms of PvP.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do for our viewing audience here is I'm going to go ahead and put in that episode so you can check that out later. Probably not now because we're not done, but later. And I'm also going to give you a different link here in a second. This is so those were the Nanofiber Awards. Again, Less Than 10 Podcast. You can listen to their latest episode or watch it. I just gave you the link here and I'll put it in the show notes. But what's coming up, and something that's not yet awarded, is the 2020 Black Mark Awards. Those are put on by Noir and the podcast Declarations of War. So that's a different podcast with different awards. They have different categories. And we won't go through their nominations. That's still going on. So you guys should vote for your favorites. I'll give you that link as well. And that's going to be announced, I imagine, pretty soon. So we're not the only game in town for awards, but we wanted to circle back to do our most influential awards because we never got to them. Usually we take care of it after the Christmas usually, but there's just too much going on with the war and stuff.
Those darn players had to destroy like 600 Titans in 4 days.
Yeah.
It kind of ruined our cadence for our shows.
Yeah, they totally took all the limelight away from everything else. So, okay, but before we even start that, this is the Talking Station's Most Influential Awards. And we want to talk a little bit about the history of this. Let's see. I'll go through this quickly because I'm tired of talking. But this started in like 2017, which was a year after we started. We didn't do a very first year. So we decided that it really, things were so interesting that we needed to point out people that had done interesting things that year. And we wanted to focus on players, not devs, not necessarily the game, but just what players had done that year and who were basically the players of the year, the player of the year, the corporation of the year, and the alliance of the year. And those were really our three starting points, right? The three levels there. And at the time, we named Aerith as the player of the year because he had really kind of constructed that model of growth. And we call it the Empire build, right? And he was the mastermind of what the steps were that were going to happen, and he put that together. We don't know if he did that alone or with a lot of help, but player of the year went to Aerith that year because Goons had, or Imperium had grown so strong that, and it was obvious that they were on a train and nobody was able to catch them and nobody was able to stop them. And we're seeing really years later now what the repercussions of that were. Corporation of the Year was Stranger Danger because I was so impressed by them socially in Vegas. They were having such a great time amongst themselves without, without performing for other people. They were just having a great time. You could tell they were a close corporation. We never got to interview them, and I think they've recently been, they recently folded and changed somewhere else, so kind of sad. The Best Alliance of the Year was actually Initiative / Triumvirate because we couldn't decide between the two. They were both, I think that year, they were both interesting. Initiative had done some, had situated their position with Goonswarm in such a way that they could actually be part of the Imperium, but also be independent. And that year, Triumvirate at the same time had really killed FCON. So in retrospect, we're going to change those. So Alliance of the Year would have been Initiative, but Event of the Year would have been Triumvirate killing FCON. And that's how we'll remember that. 2017. I'll put that in there for you guys here. And then 2018 came around and we did player organization instead of corporation because corporations were hard to find. And Pando won for Player of the Year because of a lot of stuff that he'd done before. But at this time, what was really hot were the Jumpy Ravens, or the Three-Eyed Ravens, I think. And he'd also done a lot of bombing with command destroyers, right? So yeah, so that he did that. So he won that year as an FC. The best organization at that point was TEST. They'd put up the TTT, the Tranquility Trade. Yeah, the 3G Ravens. The Tranquility Trade Center. They'd actually attacked Horde. They'd won the fight over Providence to pick up all those stations. They'd just done a number of things, and they were growing into the beast that they are now. And then the biggest event of that year would have been UALX, because that was the year of massive Titan fighting. But no battle was more interesting than UALX, in my opinion. Okay, in 2019 is last year. The player of the year was the Explorer, really the player of the decade, the Explorer Katia Say, who circumvented the entire EVE Online cluster and the wormholes in between. So there's nobody who's traveled more to more diverse areas and mapped it out, and also did it with a cat and mouse style of gameplay where Katia never lost a ship doing it. So that was also, and it was a 9-year voyage. So it was a big, big, big deal.
I think that's the most impressive part, right? Going to every system, okay, anyone can do that. Well, I guess technically anyone can, but going through there and then not dying in the process just blows my mind.
Yeah,
I jumped the wrong gate yesterday and died just because I just clicked the wrong thing. Like I was just being an idiot. I can't imagine going 10 years without making a dumb idiot mistake like that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine going 10 minutes without doing that on purpose.
Yeah. But Katya did that, and it was funny because when we talked to CCP Muppet Hunter, who's part of I think the leadership there at CCP now, he said that, hey, that's PvP too. Is not getting killed is PvP. You know, lurking and getting away with things is also PvP. So in that sense, we considered Katya like the best PvPer ever because managed to avoid being killed. It's a little bit of a joke, but also kind of some truth to it. And the organization that year was Trigger Happy. And unfortunately, we rewarded them with that as kind of like with a promise that they would do more the next year. So we kind of screwed that one up because they'd done a lot that year. They were showing a new way of playing the game. They were part of the small alliances that were doing independent things. Like, I don't know, Suetonia, Trigger Happy, do you think that did they set the tone for like Tribute in that area, or was that a combination of things?
Well, at the time, right, like they were doing something like really cool. Like this was just after a Tribute and Veil of the Sun got glassed. And I believe Kendar and a bunch of guys from Goons kind of split off, as well as a few other groups joined them. And they kind of made this like cool little independent society in Tribute and Veil, where like each kind of group had maybe 2 to 3 constellations, and they weren't necessarily all blue to each other. They were like had nips here and there. And it was like wars between like Tribute and Veil. And it was pretty cool to see, because at the time, I believe there wasn't really that many independent groups in Nullsec. And they were kind of like an all-star team back then too, right? Because I think like a lot of famous, like of course you had Kendar, which is like a really good Goon FC going over there. Then you also had like I think Yintan and a bunch of other like celebrities going over there. I remember I think it was Eve London in 2019. They were like by far like one of the biggest groups there. So I think they had like a lot of hype surrounding them. I think this was just after Snuff had disbanded too. So a lot of Snuffed Out were in Trigger Happy at the time. They were kind of like the super group, the cool guys for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And Elise Elise pointed those out. Elise, I think that was your fault that we voted for them, to your credit.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely the flavor of the month. It felt like every month of that year, right? So they were definitely cool.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we have a Katya say emoji, and I just put it in there. So if you guys want to spam that at times, that is the most famous explorer there. So we made that. We should make one for Pando and Aerith as well. Well, yeah, it was a good pick, I think. And again, in 2019, the event of the year had to be Blackout, because it had such a punishing month for some people, but it also had reverberations, I think, that we're still feeling.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you can still feel the aftershocks of Blackout going through just the Eve development cycle and just how players act as well.
I feel like Blackout, what they learned from Blackout kind of went into making the ESS and dynamic bounty system changes.
Yeah, that's a pretty direct. Well, that and the Sino changes, right? Those are pretty direct links to Blackout. They're trying to achieve the same thing Blackout achieved, but not so harshly because it's so oppressive, right?
Well, I guess they figured that like Blackout made people not play the game. So in order to try to give people the option of maybe keeping their safety with less reward, because the problem was people were making like way too much money with like in relative safety. So they tried blackout and people didn't play, so they cut the amount of money they made where they retained the safety, but they could make more money by being less safe. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and we're still seeing that. We're still seeing them design around that philosophy of making players play the game to make money rather than to inherit money when they do AFK or very safe things in a safe environment in nullsec. Yeah, so here we are then in 2020. And we're going to take these in a different order, so we leave some drama to the end. So we'll do player at the end, and we'll do events, then the balance change, and then the overall trend and feature changes that have happened. And then we'll talk about the group, and then we'll talk about the player of the year for Talking in Stations. All right. So we'll start with the most important event of 2020. And we did do a little of this before, and we were just going to come and announce who the winners were. But let's go over some of these events here, because something happened after like December on 29th, basically, New Year's Eve. And that was the armor timer for M2 TAC. And what a showdown that was. At least what just review why that was such a big deal.
So the first armor timer, or the armor timer for M2, it was like obviously a massive fight. It's where Pappy and Imperium traded Titans almost 1-for-1 at the end of 11 hours of fighting. Going into it, both sides thought they had the advantage. During the fight, both sides thought they were winning. Then after the fight, both sides claimed victory. It has never happened before, anything like that, where like there just so much winning happened without like having a side that feels like it's losing. Generally in a big super fight or even any type of fleet, when you're losing, you definitely kind of feel like you're losing, right? Like you're aware of that you're at least not winning, or someone's doing better than you. But in this one, both sides honestly felt like they were winning. It lined up with their goals, with their stated objectives and everything. It was just like this weird, never before seen in 15 years of EVE combat type of serendipitous moment that was just filled with destruction, just absolute destruction that we eclipsed every metric that we had. The server was like pretty good in terms of responding. It just felt like you were having a huge epic space battle.
Yeah. I don't think that can be understated, right? The server working as well as it did for so many people in such a brawl, those elements were very important because they set up the not so great aftermath of the whole timer later, but that was on the first of the year, I think, or the second.
Yeah, that'll be in the 2021 events, right? But yeah, this one, and it was spontaneous as well. It's not like both of these sides had planned this. No one wrote an op for biggest super cap fight ever and put it on a post-it note on the fridge or something. No, it just happened to play out organically. And it was just completely fascinating. And it was definitely, it's going to go down in history of EVE's very deep history as probably the most important space battle ever.
Right. Okay. So that was the very last day of the year, essentially. So all the way to the very end, there was a lot of stuff happening in EVE Online. Before that, somewhere in October, was the Fury at FWST TAC 8. Tell us what happened in that battle, if you remember. I get them all confused these days.
I mean, so the FWST battle, so this is when Pappy were still trying to get a foothold in Delve. They were trying to get anything they could into Delve, so they kept dropping Keepstar after Keepstar after Keepstar, and they would have great fights over it. Pappy loved the idea of and in their version, in their view, they were bleeding the Imperium of their ships and their stuff. and they were trading essentially like 1,000 ravens for a keep star. So I'm pretty sure that this, I don't remember which keep star.
I think this was actually the Fortizar in FWST that started escalating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. So the fighting had gone on over keep stars are going on. My bad. All these things get
no, but you're good to lay that foundation first. But yeah.
So this was over keep star or a Fortizar timer that was actually on grid with the keeps, or what would be the keep star. It actually ended up playing a significant role later because it wasn't there.
That's right. This is actually very interesting because the FWST is where the actual first keep star went down that stayed because they bubble wrapped it. And that was possible because a Fortizar belonging to Goonswarm was destroyed in the battle of the Fury at FWST. And so it was strategically consequential, but it was also an exciting fight to watch. I think we both had a lot of fun announcing it. And it also had a tactic we hadn't seen happen at the same scale, which was the boson trap, which was beautiful to watch. It didn't blow up because there was I believe the actual mechanic that was broken was that the ships were only taking a little bit of damage per second, which allowed them to not take the full damage of the boson trap.
Yeah, I think Asher said something about the first 3 like ticks of the damage hit, and then like no more damage hit after that.
Yeah, I'd heard that it was something to do with the way fighters take damage, so that they don't get completely blown off, taking a full damage in the first second or so. That they mitigate the damage every second, so it takes a certain amount of damage per second. I may be wrong about this, but somebody was explaining it to me that it was like a fighter thing, and it applied to the ships, which was wrong. It shouldn't apply to the ships. So they went and they said, okay, ships can take full damage every round, every second, and that's how they fixed that. I think.
I have absolutely no idea. I just know, I remember watching the aftermath of it. I was listening to people that were in the super fleet. They were like, "Oh no, this is going to be the death of us," and then they didn't die. They actually barely got scratched, and they're like, "Oh, this isn't so bad." We actually spoke to Hippojax, who was one of those boson titans. He was one of the people entrusted to this, I guess, like a team of Imperium Titan pilots. Because if you screw up in that moment, if you're like the last one going for that death blow, and your bosun or your doomsday just goes in the wrong direction, because you have to manually move that, then you go down in history as like the biggest choker ever. But yeah,
there's definitely a spotlight on that moment. And it was fun and it was inventive. And for us, it was neat to figure out and to watch it in real time, real tie-dye time, but real bullet time, I guess. But that was the Fury at FWST.
Yeah, all those Titan, the initial Delve Keep Star timers were incredibly fascinating to watch. And it was, from an FCing perspective and from a theory crafting perspective, it was very interesting how each one was very subtly different. You saw people adapting essentially in real time different strategies. You saw the Imperium, like their first strategy was, we'll throw everything we have at it. The second strategy was, hell, we don't actually have to throw the kitchen sink at it. We can take a more measured response, up until like the second to last one, where the Imperium like essentially got the build down super cheap. They were just like, we'll warp in carriers, throw some drones off them, warp the carriers off. They'll never die. Warp some ravens in to keep it paused. They had like the perfect cadence to apply consistent damage to a keep star under tie-dye, which is no small feat. So it was really, really cool to see those fights play out. I kind of miss that part of the war because it was it seemed like a brand new battle every 2 days.
Yeah, I think we're being corrected. Gashin Kapula says that was YZ9, and I think he's right. I think we're talking about YZ9. So Fury at FWST was I think that was the record breaker.
Oh, nice. So I wasn't wrong. It was one of the keep stars going down. Nice.
You were right. You were right.
Feels good. That whole area was just a powder keg, though, right? Like any little thing could set off this big fight.
And they were pretty successive. Like we're talking a day or two in between each fight. They were just one after another for about a week and a half. And it was exhausting to cover, but it was just each one was too important not to cover. So we had to cover them all. And we must have done, I don't know, 50, no, not 50, but more like 30 hours of live coverage in the span of a week. So anyway, those were the big battles that happened in October in this war when things really intensified. Earlier in the year before that was the Chappie birthday bash, which was a bittersweet event that happened. It turned out to be a really beautiful event. So Chappie was a person who had an illness and was leaving the game to recover or to take care of that in real life. And so anyway, it was a pretty bad prognosis. So people wanted to give him a present of a big battle. And I think so the word spread very quickly, and a lot of people, very, very short notice in the middle of a big war, just stopped what they were doing and decided to do this big fight inside of HiSec. And it turned out to be just a huge brawl. Right? Oh, I'm sorry, LowSec, yeah, because there were capitals in it. You're right. So that was a bittersweet moment. It got some press coverage, and thankfully Chappie is still with us, and I think he still pops around here and there, and he's doing okay, and hopefully will do better. But yeah, that was a really nice thing.
The system they fought in, isn't that in Pokven though?
Yeah, I think that is in Pokven.
I think it is, yeah.
In Pokven.
Yeah. That system. So because did they put a memorial up? I think they did.
Yeah, the memorial's still there in the Pokven system.
It's good. Pokven has a memorial in it. All right, then we get to stuff that's less nullsec related. And this one, we talked about it before, but maybe we discuss it a little more. The eviction of TDSIN, which stands for, what does that stand for, Suetonia?
Sorry, what was that?
TDSIN.
Oh, that stands for the I think it's like the Dark Space Initiative, which is
Suki's corp.
Yeah, so famously they were evicted, I think, sometime in April of last year. It was, I think, the biggest wormhole fight.
Yep. Yeah, so TDSIN, I just forgot what it stood for because I think of them as scary wormhole people, but I think that's the alliance. TDSIN is no, really, that's the name of their alliance, scary wormhole people. But the corporation is the Dark Space Initiative. Thanks there, guys. And so TDSIN is the group that is formed around chiefly Exuki, who you know as a CSM member, but also as a magnificent CSM member that gave a huge presentation on how wormholes worked, how they actually played, how people actually had tamed certain aspects of them and where some of their pain points were. And CCP was blown away at the level of presentation they got. And I think we can all agree on that. And so what followed was kind of a lot of nerfing of wormhole space. And I wonder if that's what got other wormholers mad at Exuki, and they took it out on his corporation, or they just didn't like him for some other reason. But it was definitely a personal grudge that Hard Knocks, I think mostly, and Laura Secco, interestingly, as part of Hard Knocks, had against Exuki. Now, I don't know if it was personal, but it was more like professional. Like they're professionally on opposite sides of things. And that's interesting because Exuki and Laura Secco would compete for a CSM seat, and they both lost because they competed that very next year. But that's definitely something that always seems to happen with wormhole candidates. They always seem to compete against one another and just like cut each other's legs out from under them. But I do think you were mentioning the presentation that Exuki gave to the CSM. That's one of the more powerful images I've ever seen from the CSM.
And I don't know if McLeod will be able to find it because I literally just thought about it when you mentioned it. But the whole thing is Igzuki giving like a presentation in this little boardroom type thing, and CCP are so fascinated by it. They're crowding into their room. They can't even. There's not enough chairs. They have to sit on the floor and like cram shoulder to shoulder just to see everything. And that just goes to show you like how impactful that presentation must have been.
Yeah. And it inspired not only CCP, but it inspired other CSM to do the same thing. I think they saw the way a CSM member could be effective. Well, Suetonia, weren't you on that same CSM?
I wasn't on the same CSM as Azuki. I was on CSM 12 and 13, so I wasn't a CSM member for 2019 and 2020.
So you were the year before.
Yeah, so I my term ended like I think May 2019.
Mm-hmm. Did you like being a CSM member? You're like,
yeah, it's really fun, and it's like awesome meeting like the devs, and the people who make the game you love. So I definitely recommend it.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask: do they tap your brain? Like, did they connect you to computers and extract your knowledge of the game? And
I had a few like interesting conversations with CCP Ghost because like apparently I'm like an elite player or something, like according to his like specification. Like they have like this specification called like elite players or something. It's like people who like bring other people into the game and like have been part of the game for a while. Like I think a lot of people in TIS are probably elite players. So
I think we're probably the only person surprised by the news that you're an elite player. Yeah. By the way, I think if you like anyone else would be like, oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that Metarel is like, did they connect you to a computer and tap yourself in? And I'm like, is Suetonia ever not connected to a computer?
I guess I meant like those electro probes and stuff. I could see them measuring his like head size and for his helmet. Yeah, everybody at TIS that we put on the air for you guys is an elite player. I mean, besides myself, I do exclude myself because you guys are all elite in the gameplay, which is different, I think. And that's what interesting. When I was watching Less Than 10, I was getting that feeling of like, oh my God, these guys know so much and they're so fluid with the language and the concepts. And Suetonia and Arcia are on that level too. And
I am one of the best at whelping harbingers.
Yeah, it takes a lot of talent to get people to do that over and over again, right? But anyway, so being on CSM, pretty good deal. Olmeca mentioned here that he and Gobbins and, Billy actually made presentations as well. And so I do feel like Igzuki's TDSIN connection really made him a target for eviction. And the thing was, they were going to evict him over and over again. It wasn't just once. It's basically saying, you're a wormholer, we're wormholers. We don't like you. We're not going to let you live in wormhole space. Wherever you go, we will root you out. And that will be our mission. And that's interesting because that's kind of what Pappy's trying to do to the Imperium, isn't it? Like, in a sense, they're trying to say, we're going to deny you growth potential or even resident potential. Okay, so it does work because Igzuki isn't really playing right now. And, he's kind of demotivated. He's kind of sleeping on the couch of initiative these days. So that kind of denial of gameplay is very interesting. Why does it look like I have a comb over? What's going on here? Get out of the way. Okay, so that was TDSIN. Next, for events of 2020. Yes, go ahead, Arcia. See that? What a main. Trig Invasions, Fall of Narsia. Arcia, why was this so important?
All right, so we had an event that ran for several months in the year where, like in Chapter 2 the year before, the Triglavians started invading systems, except in this case, some of the time, if the system met certain properties, and the Triglavians won the invasion. This time they had the ability to win the invasion because there was a bar that could be pushed up, either pushed all the way up so the Empires won the invasion, or pushed all the way down so the Triglavians won the invasion. If they won invasions in blue or certain yellow stars, the system would drop in security status. High security systems would drop to low security, and then low security systems would drop to null security. And if they dropped a second bar, they would go to 0-0, right? You couldn't use bubbles or bombs at the time, but the system would effectively turn lawless, even if it was previously a high-sec system, if it met those conditions. And a lot of players signed up on, or started showing up to these invasions and fighting for one side or another. And in the end result is obviously the Pachven region that has 27 systems divided amongst the 3 clades of the Triglavians. But the journey to get there saw a lot of really, really fun and engaging fights, both with the mechanics of the invasions, but also direct fights in like the low security and liminal systems. There was amazing fights in Skarkon and Angry Money and Archie and Allah and tons of other systems. And there were very close pushes of the bar in other systems like, Arshat was the one system that was flipped from liminality back to Fortress. But there are a lot of systems where like they just went on for days and days and days, and some of them went that long and to the point the system just timed out and nobody won because it was so close. It was just several months of a lot of players interacting with this content that ended up in the culmination of a new region.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about Pachven. By the way, is it Pachven or Pachven? How do you say it?
I was told that the correct way of saying it is Pachven, I believe.
Pachven, okay.
I have trouble remembering to say it like that because I look at it and see Pachven, right? Yeah. But that's apparently wrong.
All right.
And people have a lot of criticism about the Pachven region itself, but that's a whole nother story. The event of the invasion itself had a lot of really, really fun moments.
Yeah. Well, how long did the invasions take overall? Like, when did they begin and end?
So, I think they ended in September, or was it October? Like early October or late September?
I think it's late September.
I think they started in March, maybe March or April. Yeah. Does that sound right? I think that sounds right.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that is, I think it's for our audience and people who watch Nullsec and stuff, that's just an underappreciated series of events there. Those invasions and especially the focal point in the Fall of Narsia was so incredibly meaningful to everything that happens afterwards.
So like,
it affects everybody.
Nyarja falling left only one connection, like high-sec connection into the Amarr Empire. And that high-sec connection was also attacked prior to Nyarja. The system of Jark could have gone liminal, but Edencom won that one. So if Edencom had lost that system, the Amarr Empire wouldn't be reachable via high-sec from the other empires. So that could have actually been a thing.
That's wild, yeah. But like, there are so many implications. I mean, the fact that Nyarja fell and essentially severed, not literally severed, but it feels like it severed Amarr off from the rest of the world. It could have just literally severed it if they gotten one more system.
Yeah.
And CCP would have let it happen, right?
Yeah, that was actually a really close fight to Jark, because I FC'd in Jark for 16 hours. It went into the night because it bounced between 49% and 51% for like 7 hours before Edencom started making ground, just because we were both killing stuff like at maximum speed.
That's wild. The dynamic of those fights, for system control, absolutely insane. The amount of dedication that just essentially a handful of pilots put into it to reshape the entire Eve map is just completely wild.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to it. We have Poshman to talk about a little bit later. Also, take us through, maybe actually, RCA, you should tell us about Providence, because it fell in 2020, didn't it? Like, fell permanently. Provi blocked it.
So Providence was it still is a region in Nullsec, but it was a region in Nullsec held for the longest time by Provi Block, which was like alliances such as CVA, Apocalypse Now, Severance, just to name a few. And their idea was to create a region of Nullsec where people could come in who were neutral, and the culture of the region was NRDS, not Red Don't Shoot, which is completely different to most of how Sov Null works, where everybody shoots first and asks questions later. So they tried to create a region that people could feel like they could come in and they could try to interact with Null, and maybe the locals wouldn't immediately shoot them. Obviously, there's different levels of commitment that certain people in Providence had to that at times, but other people were very dedicated to that cause. Like myself, the first time I ever went into Nullsec was because I had heard Providence is NRDS. Maybe I can actually go try to feel this out. Because I was like a peaceful explorer way back, like a decade ago. And I went into Nullsec with a Harbinger, no less. And I was like ratting with a Harbinger in Providence, like an idiot. And I cleared an anomaly successfully. And I took another jump and I died to a bubble camp. And I was like, oh, that's not so bad. Why was I scared of that? Right? So I feel like a lot of people have a similar story where the region of Providence that was supposedly tried to maintain an NRDS way of life got a lot of people to try it out who maybe wouldn't have tried out Nullsec without that.
So you're saying it was a good entry point for people to ease into the trauma of fighting player versus player.
So, the reality of it is that Providence was more dangerous than most regions because people would go there and hunt because there's a lot of clueless neutrals there. But on its surface, when you hear about an NRDS region, it sounds like that's a good place to go be a clueless neutral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of FCs that kind of started in Providence, either with Provi Block or shooting against Provi Block. Obviously, you have Jintan, who is probably the more recent name that came from there. You have someone like Makalu Zarya, who came out from there and then essentially led AAA as their main FC for years and years and years. I think Pro God Legends started in that area as well. So it was a lot of proving grounds for definitely some talent to come out. The problem that Providence did face, though, is that they weren't able to retain any of this talent. It all went somewhere else, right? So essentially that probably ended, or at least led to, in part, their demise.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, RCA does make a good point. It was an incredibly dangerous region that everyone kind of flocked to at some point in their EVE careers. I very fondly remember going into KVP7 in a Drake, and just typing, "Help, I'm tackled in the top belt." And then someone from Providence would come in to try and save me, or some neutral would come in to try and save me. And obviously we'd gank the crap out of them. Like it was like our little bait setup. But can you imagine?
Terrible person.
Can you imagine playing EVE Online in 2021, typing "Help, I'm tackled in a belt" unironically, and then someone would try to help you? That just does not happen anymore. People would just see through that in an instant.
Because of you, that doesn't happen, Elias.
You're the one that
it still happens. You just need to join terrible alliances.
Actually, I flew around Delve, and I will, like, with the war, I'll tackle one side and you let the other side kill it. And that happened. I tackled one of those Goon Swarm sigils that have the super shield regen with a vengeance, and I couldn't kill it. So there were like 8 test people docked in local, and I just shouted in local, "I've got some Goon Swarm guy tackled on so-and-so gate." And the test people didn't backstab me. They just came and killed it. I was surprised that they didn't shoot me too.
Well, they're like, tests are like murder hornets to bees, right? They're single-minded creatures.
But I will gladly feed either side of the war to the other one.
Yeah.
With no remorse.
Right. Good. As a true nature lover would do.
But,
so Tony, did you ever spend time in Providence?
Yeah, I actually kind of started PvP in Providence for when I was kind of new at the game. So I went through like missions and exploration, all of that stuff, and then I actually joined like a war deck corporation. We were actually fighting against some pirates that used to camp Galanti Losec, and we killed them. And basically, they ran to Providence to I think it was Sylph Space, and they were hiding behind Sylph Space. And actually, these guys, I think they actually got blacklisted by Providence after a while. So what they were doing, they were cam baiting in Tash Mercon and killing like Providence guys in Derelict. Back when that was part of like Operation Deliverance or something. It was like Dark Taboo Alliance. But anyway, we got set KOS to CVA for like hunting down and killing these pirates in Catch. So that's when I started actually getting into solo PvP, because I said like, fuck these guys, I'm just going to take a scepter and kill them then. And I got tons of kills, and I took out like a Tyrannus. And I don't think I'm no longer number 1, but I think I'm like number 2 for like all-time Tyrannus kills in the game. I think I have like 2,400 solo kills in a Tyrannus. And that was just from like dogfighting CVA guys constantly.
So Tony's got the best origin story. So, this is like the funniest thing.
Well, the origin story of CVA was that it was founded by Praetorian Imperialis Exubitoris, which is an Amarr role-playing corporation, alliance now. It's its own alliance now. But it was founded by Pi Inc., which is a really hyper strict Amarr group. Only flies Amarr ships, only used to let Amarr bloodlines into the corp. And they still exist today as third oldest corporation in the entire game ever created. Like, when the game launched, they were the third corporation created. So they started it as like an Amarr thing to reclaim Providence, because like the lore behind Providence was it was like a region the Empire is trying to grab. So that's kind of like the origin story of Providence itself. But to go back to the NRDS rules of engagement, I've flown some flavor of NRDS the entire time I've been playing this game. And I find it so funny that I can fly around Null and shoot almost everybody because everybody's red. And all the NBSI, not blue, shoot at people that I know. I'm like, oh, do you want to come roaming with me? But they can't shoot anybody, right? So NRDS people seem to be able to shoot more people than NBSI people, I think.
Oh yeah, I was in CVA as well for like 2012, because like Hydra Alliance kind of died for a little bit after AT10, because we got basically like DQ'd from it, basically because of AT9. So I joined CVA during that time, and I used to just troll RP AAA and farm them. It's like whenever you like role play, like people just assume you're terrible at the game. So I would just role play like say like a Amarr Victor in local or something, and then I would just like kill like a AAA tornado in a Tyrannus, you know.
So you would bait them well, how would you bait them? What would you say in local?
I didn't even know the lore, so I would just like copy paste like medal descriptions in game and just like parts of Chronicles and stuff. So, and then that would just make like if you just put that in local, they just like think you're like some crazy guy who's terrible or something. So they would just like undock and feed to me. It was pretty fun.
So like, it's I've never understood the idea that RPers are bad at PvP, because most RPers spend most of their time in the game fighting each other. Like,
well, it's different though than other games. I heard our peers in EVE are the toughest players in EVE. They're the hardest ones.
Elise, have you ever went up against our peers in a tournament?
I don't know. I don't remember, actually.
That's why he started looking away from the camera.
I knew it was coming.
Well, yeah, but I've heard from a long time ago, at least, I don't know but the reputation was our peers in EVE Online are serious business. Like, they're actually incredibly talented fighters. So it's not like other games.
I think it actually depends on when you started to play EVE Online. If you started way back when, CVA and All of Providence, you didn't want to get on their bad side, right? Because they were formidable and they would lock you out of an entire region if you screwed them over. And you'd be like, oh man, I'm blacklisted. This sucks. I have to roll an alt in order to get into that area and do anything I want. And they weren't like spooky. They weren't like a Giga Ultra superpower or something, but you didn't want to piss them off. And then they became kind of someone that you didn't really care if you pissed off. And then they became someone that you wanted to bully a little bit. And I think CVA became synonymous, at least Providence maybe became synonymous with role players as well.
The funny part about that is that Providence, most of Providence stopped seriously RPing long before that happened.
Yeah, there's true.
Obviously RPers in CVA to this day, but as an overall force, CVA wasn't really on most of the outside of they showed up in the Becca. They weren't really on a lot of RP groups' radar for a long time.
When I first joined Faction Warfare, when it came out that summer, I think in 2000, I don't know, remember when.
Faction Warfare 2009.
Yeah, there you go. So it came out that summer, and I remember we were keep asking. I was on the Amar side, and we were keep asking CVA to show up, and then we just do things that would piss them off, and we're like, oh no, if we make them too mad, they're gonna ruin us from this area.
Let me tell you about one time CVA showed up to a timer in the war zone. So it's an Amar group fighting against the Minmatar group in Satogas. Minmatar group dropped 2 citadels. The Amar group formed RR Prophecies. The Minmatar group formed Munins. They didn't have enough Munins to break the RR Prophecies, and the RR Prophecies are just shooting one of the citadels to kill it because they can't kill the Munins either. And the Amar dropped a dread on the second citadel to prevent them from anchoring because the Munins couldn't kill a Revelation either. But since CVA pinged for it, Tempest showed up and killed the Amar dread. Right? Why did we tell these guys again?
Wait, aren't Templates and CVA meant to be allied? Because I thought Templates were Caldari role players.
Templates were part of Wrecking Crew at the time when Wrecking Crew was invading CVA.
But technically, they're
Templates are in Caldari militia, but they do have role players like Diana Kim's in Templates, who is Miss Caldari state, but very few of them interact with role players in that way. They just seem to want to kill shit.
All right, so we'll move on from Providence, but Providence and all that goodness that we were talking about, the way it was is changed now. So Providence fell in 2019. Another thing, though, and back to Arcia again, we have you talking a lot, is a Flossiswin. Tell us what Flossiswin was and why it was important.
All right, so Flossiswin is a system in the Amar Minmatar war zone. And towards the end of 2019, there was a post by an NPC on the forums saying that the Amar Empire was going to start actively slaving in the system of Flossiswin by Okalar Zersarum. In 2020, most of the fighting in the system actually happened for the first from January to April to May. I think the two militias fought each other in Flossiswin, and thousands and thousands and thousands of kills happened in the system at the beginning of last year. It was just constant fighting over this one system because of a shit post by an NPC on the forums. A lot of Citadel fights, a lot of just fighting over the complexes, the faction warfare complexes to flip the system. It was just a really, really, it was one of the biggest wars in LoSec that had like ever happened. Just like the amount of stuff that died there is really incredible for LoSec.
Yeah, remember seeing that happen. That was pretty cool. All right, so those are the events. I'll reread them now. M2 at the very end of the year, the Keepstar series of fights. So that encompasses YZ9 and FWST. So we'll just put that all together since it's one big dream. Chappie's Birthday Bash, Providence Falling, the Eviction of TDSIN, Triglavian Invasions, and the Fall of Narsia, and Philosophwin, which we just talked about. And the winner for the most important event of 2020, not 2019, 2020 is Keepstar Fights in Delve, YZ9, and FWST. And that whole series of fights, because that was earth shaking. And if we don't celebrate the biggest things that players did in the face of celebrating like more novel play, then we wouldn't be doing our jobs. So scale wins for the biggest event of 2020 in this case. And that is just giant Keepstar fights that cost trillions and was just hours and hours and hours of viewing time. A little applause in the background. Okay, let's move on. Arcee, you were going to say something and I cut you off. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say there's rumors of like Philosophwin 2 Electric Boogaloo happening soon. So keep your eyes out.
All right, mechanics change for 2020. Let's just go through these really quick. Metaliminal storms. Suetonia, why are those so cool?
Yeah, so space weather has always been like one of the things that people have requested since like EVE has been out, and it's really just a really cool new thing to like actually have like these weather effects that move around the game.
Yeah, and they are buffs and debuffs depending on the storm type, and they travel and they move along predictable paths, and they move very slowly. Once every day or two they move. Surgical Strike, that was the big resist change, Elise. Why do you think that was a big deal?
Yeah, so that was the change where, and thanks to McLeod earlier, who reminded me of everything that was in it. It's not just the resist change. So it's where the resists of every ship, or essentially all the hardeners for the ships, got kicked down a notch. Right, so the idea of just being able to tank through things and bringing just preponderance of logistics to be able to keep your ships alive, that started to kind of go by the wayside. It also increased the damage for Tech 2 close range ammo, and there are a few other changes in there as well. It was pretty beefy. The entire concept of it was make more stuff explode faster and better. Which I think EVE players really liked. But it completely revamped doctrines in EVE Online. Every theory crafter had to go back to the drawing board, no matter how they played EVE, right? If you were a solo mission runner, you had to relook at your ship to make sure it could still tank. If you were a wormholer, you had to relook at your doctrines to make sure all that would work just the same. If you were a nullsec fleet leader, you had to go back to the drawing board and kind of tweak your fittings a little bit to make sure that you knew how to survive and kind of retrain your brain as well, because you don't want to go into a fight thinking, oh yeah, we'll just tank this for a while and trade. The entire dynamic shifted, so it was hugely important, and just kind of ground shaking for flying ships in space.
Yeah, Conflag, Hail, and Void are a lot better now too, and Rage missiles.
If I'm not mistaken, was that the first balance pass of the year? Is it where they set the tone on the balance?
It was around March or April, I believe.
Oh, you're right. Right, because the Howling Interceptors were first. I think that was if I'm not mistaken.
So that was the previous year. That was Halloween in 2019, I believe, and we had a further update to them in 2020.
Oh, Fight or Flight is what I'm thinking of. First quadrant. All right. Anyway, thank you, Elise. Okay, the other thing is obviously the DBS, that is Dynamic Bounty System, and ESS, and Counter Surveillance System, combination of features, which, I don't know, so Tonya, do you want to describe what those do and why they're important?
Yeah, so I think I remember reading in the CSM minutes from the last years that CCP wanted like big organizations to have like more failure points and for people to be able to like steal from big organizations. And I think like the ESS and the dynamic bounty system are kind of examples of that, as well as like trying to redistribute the wealth a lot more into like smaller groups' hands. So the way the dynamic bounty system works essentially is that every system now has basically a percentage multiplier based on like how much bounties they give out. It can go as high as 180%. I believe the baseline is 130%. So typically, like most systems that have people living in them where they're dying, like they tend to range from about around 130 to 160% approximately. And like systems like people are typically using them like how people used to farm. They just like in dead ends with scouts, and they instantly dock up as soon as anyone comes into their space, or they're just like turbo crabbing with supers. Those systems tend to go down to like sub 80%, maybe even 60%. So they make a lot less money. And the ESS is kind of a counterpart to that, where I believe like something like 35% of the bounties, it's about 35 to 40%, approximately go inside the ESS where it's accessible for everyone. It takes 2 hours for it to pay out, and it takes about 6.5 minutes to steal from it, but only cruisers and up can steal from it. So the idea is that you have to defend your space in order to get the full amount of ISK. So especially like it's another hit as well if you're the kind of people who like instantly dock up as soon as people come into your space, because not only is your dynamic bounty system going to be lower, but then you're also going to lose like a third or so of the ISK that you're getting anyway if you don't defend the ESS.
And when you go inside the ESS, it very notably scrams you with a radius of 75 kilometers. So a lot of ESS fits have to have like an afterburner of some sort to be able to move around. And this makes the ESS fit ships very different than ships that do other things in null in a lot of cases. So you don't want to just kind of like YOLO into an ESS if you have like an MWD, because you're never going to get out, right? You have to slow boat 75 kilometers or so. It notably adds like little dead space complexes in every null security system, which has completely changed roaming in nullsec. So dead space complexes are something everybody who grew up in lowsec in faction warfare is used to. You warp to the outside of it, and there's an acceleration gate, and it's dead space outside. So a lot of times people will try to fight each other by birding away from that acceleration gate, because if somebody comes to you and then comes out and tackles you, their friends can't warp directly to them on that grid. So it's been like possibly like one of the biggest changes they could have done for like small gang roamers. I've been using it constantly to get good fights in nullsec, just on a small level, just not even going inside the ESS on the outside. But if you do go inside the ESS, and you can steal the money and get the little tokens, and something like 30% of the money is deleted when you steal it. That way, people don't just steal their own money to get it faster.
Oh, wow. I learned some things. I thought I knew what was going on there.
Yeah, somebody says ESS didn't change roaming, but they're not using the ESS to force fights on the outside of the ESS. You don't go inside the ESS. You burn away from the gate, and people will come after you, and then it's just you versus them. People can't warp to you.
Instant bait mechanic, huh? All right.
Well, it's not even a bait mechanic. It's just a way of not getting blocked.
But I imagine you're around the gate to have them try to defend, so they're coming to shoo you away.
Well, yeah, you'll be like 300 off of it, so they have to burn a little bit.
Yeah, but you're drawing them to you with that excuse, right? With that,
like, no, if you combat probe the SS and you warp to the person, you warp to 0 on the gate, like they'll see you there. You will be you will show up both on combat probes and on D-scan. But if you try to combat probe somebody, you still don't warp to them.
Yeah, you can use it to scout people, similar to local people doing factional warfare, to check a medium plex to see if there's a recon hiding inside it. You can get the probe results, you just can't warp to the guys at 0.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how a lot of people in LoL don't even know how they work, because sometimes I just go to a really busy systems ESS and burn off and see how many, and I'll see all the combat probes on D-scan, and you just see like a string of like cloaky T3s landing on the gate and getting decloaked because they're trying to combat probe me. And I'm just sitting there like 500 off. It's like, there's a Loki, there's a Legion, there's a Proteus. It's just like, and they just they probably have no idea what's happening until, like, it's just so funny to me.
Right. So that's interesting. There's more to learn there. Another thing that was really important, and this is something that Lesson 10 liked, again, Suetonia, but anybody can actually talk about this, filaments. Why do you think filaments are so important?
Well, they eliminate a lot of the legwork needed to be able to just go out and roam in nullsec. Like previously, you would have to like be pre-staged in like a class 2 wormhole with a nullsec static, or be inside Thera, or like already be like staged somewhere. Like if you're just in Jitter and you want to roam somewhere, like you'd have to, first of all, you'd have to like take like 15 minutes to get to nullsec, but then you'd also probably have to deal with like some kind of low sec gate camp as well, which kind of prevents you from flying bigger stuff as well. So it allows people to fly, I think, like heavier stuff without having to like take it through low sec and take it through like the entrance camps. And it also just makes it a lot easier just to get out there to begin with. You don't have to like waste 15 minutes roaming. It also makes it like a lot easier to just kind of like do like Eve pickup groups as well. Because like previously, like you wouldn't want to like just take some random guy into your wormhole because, you know, he might be like planning to evict you or something and like start like seeding ships in there. But hey, you can just invite him to your fleet and go out with him in Jitter, right? So it's great for that too.
Yeah, between filaments and the like public Thera bookmarks, it's really easy to just throw yourself out there and like move around in nullsec. It's like in December of the year before last, when filaments were being tried out, I did like multiple Yeet fleets every week, and I was so excited when they were being added to the game permanently, and I use them weekly to this day. They're really fun. It's nice to play the game. Where do you think you're going to land? Like if you're doing a fleet, X in fleet with a region, and if you're right, everybody pays you a million ISK. It's kind of fun.
At least do you use these?
I do, yeah. It's essentially pretty much anytime we want to do something that's not like a fleet, or there's downtime between fleets, or we just want to goof around, we'll theory craft some dumb like 4 or 5 man fleet and just take a filament and see where we end up, and then just go in there. Sometimes I'll go to the ESSs. I've had some bad luck with the ESS recently, so I avoid it. But we just kind of roam around until we die, and then we're like, okay, well that was a good like fun night of EVE Online without having to roam very far, without having to like have wormhole chains probed out all over the world. As RC mentioned, I can use like, I'm always kind of close to a Thera hole anyways when I take a filament anyways. So if I go into a dead region, I'll just wander over to Thera and then just keep wandering and keep going until I die.
And you can obviously use the Pockfin filaments to yeet out, and then Pockfin to high sec filaments to yeet back.
Yeah, that's the big brain maneuver. That's kind of the area that I don't really like about it. I don't like being able to yeet back to high sec so much.
Yeah, I'm not sold that it's great, but that is the way the game works now.
Yeah,
I like carrying a depot and probes and probing my way back. But also another thing people didn't mention about the filaments is if you're roaming and you get caught in a pipe and they like death camp you in, you bounce around for 15 minutes and you yeet away, right? You don't have to feed into them. So it rewards that. It anti-rewards just mega camping roamers, so that's good.
Yeah, well, they get what they want too, though, right? Like they get you out of their space so they can go and return to doing PvE. So it's kind of win-win for everyone.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it.
It strikes a really good harmony in kind of like every aspect of like what EVE is supposed to be, right? It gives you a nice outlet to have some action. It doesn't make you immune from anything. It puts importance on guarding your own space, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, this is where I disagree. And as a person that doesn't use Yeats that much, like I'm definitely in the minority for this. But I feel like, I've always talked about this, you have an unwritten contract that if I can be vulnerable in space at any time, then my defensive maneuver against you is to have a time that there's a time barrier that you have to break through in order to catch me and kill me. And that's really my only defense. So in other words, if I get to be vulnerable all the time, you have to spend time to find me. And this shortens that time. So it's almost like promoting more combat at the expense of people who don't want to get into combat, but have to fly into dangerous areas to do the harvesting they want to do. But I've made that objection a few times. And I feel like it also creates the empires that build themselves into a complete safety net, right? They would normally have to travel 20 jumps in order to even begin to see something new. And that's a pain. And so it makes you want to not live so clustered into one place. But with these filaments, you bypass that. And I thought that was also a little bit of a gift to people who want to live a certain way.
The good news is that the filaments are restricting in the size you can take. You can take the 25-man, which are actually kind of a pain in the butt to get in the first place anyways. But so you can't take like 100-man fleet. You're stuck taking 25 or fewer.
25 filaments are honestly sometimes the cheapest. You can just mass buy them in like Jada. It's not that bad to get them.
Yeah, you always get them as like the 30th day you log in, the same day you get the 150k SP from logging in for 30 days is when you always get a 25-man filament. So they're actually pretty cheap because like pretty much everyone, like you'll get one every time you sub your account as long as you log in each day.
Yeah, like I use 25 filaments most of the time when I'm solo just because they're cheaper, because the other ones come from like the OR LP store, and who does that?
All right. Little program note. Are we buffering out there or everybody can everything? Okay. We'll assume everything's good. All right. So that was filaments. There's a couple. I'll take these really quickly, at least unless you want to jump in. EVE Portal, I thought was an interesting upgrade they did. Now you can buy Plex out right out of your phone, but you can only do it in the Jita station. I don't think that's a big deal, as big as I thought it would be, but there it is. I thought that was pretty cool. But also the EVE Portal web app, the companion web app to EVE Online, has just improved in general, so that's pretty good. Also, Quantum Cores, I think we have yet to see what kind of role they play, but because they were rolled in late in the year and they're still rolling in, they really only finished the roll-in process a few days ago. So we'll see if those cores actually end up causing more conflict. And then the final one is broker relations. We're losing Suetonius, unfortunately. I'm glad we had him as long as we did. He has to take off. And the internet is being a little bit weird, so if we're buffering or anything, let us know. Broker relations, I think, was actually a big deal because that slowed down the... essentially, day trading went away after that. And day trading was a big part of a lot of players' gameplay, where you would basically one-up each other in the order. So if Elise paid 10 ISK for something, I would pay 11 ISK, and then he would come back and pay 12 ISK, and then 13, and you would just basically try to stay on top while you sold your stuff. And that was a very active market gameplay. And that really got washed out with the broker relations change that happened. Okay, so those are the mechanic and balance changes. And so the winner for the 2020 most, I think, influential mechanic balance change I'm going to say is broker relations, because that did a lot more than people think. It slowed down the market, which in some ways made it a lot more strategic for long-term investment. It took away the sitting there and one-upping each other gameplay, which was fun for some people. Some people actually left the game because that went away. But at the same time, it made it possible to use the market without having to sit there for Plex, for instance, and try to sell and buy your stuff while you were there. And the long-term ramifications of that, I think, are still being witnessed. But that, along with scarcity, has made people a lot of money. And it's also made people not want to actually participate in the market, which means that the people who do participate are a lot more specialized, which I think in time will be an interesting and influential change overall. Okay, next topic, the overall feature and game change that has influenced the game the most. There's, we won't go into this too much, but the resource changes, the scarcity changes, or some people call them the famine changes for resources. Real quick, Elise, what do you think about those? What are those changes, and what do you think about them?
I mean, there are just a whole lot of things. Like the design is to reduce the wealth from some of the wealthiest players. Minerals have been redistributed across. Low-Sec now is the only place for Noxium. Mexilon's a hugely important mineral. Morphite is just going crazy, astronomical in prices. Morphite feels like Bitcoin. Yeah, just a lot of overall changes to the ecosystem of EVE Online. And really, it does feel like a change to, or a nerf to, institutional knowledge of how to generate wealth in EVE, right? So if you're an old player, you kind of know how to make money in EVE. You might not do it, but you've figured out the tips and tricks for it. Now all of that's being tossed on its head. So who knows what's going to happen, right? Like an older player no longer has like a massive advantage over a newer player, as we're both exploring the brand new world of EVE Online and making ISK.
Yeah. Also, it shows you, I think, these, what we looked at earlier, the Keepstar fights that we saw, and just how much was destroyed as far as assets. And when we saw M2 fight and how much was destroyed in assets, and we still haven't hit bottom. We're getting close, but we haven't hit bottom. Shows you why the scarcity needed to happen. The amount of assets and availability of resources that some players had was astounding, and still is. But those resource changes have really kind of also rejuvenated players in the harvesting part of the game. Like I'm thinking of low-sec mining now is kind of a thing, and so is high-sec mining is now very popular, and that just wasn't for a long time. It was almost like training so that you could go to one of these empires that would totally recruit you into their safety net and allow you to harvest in a big way. And now it doesn't seem like a waste of time.
Yeah, for the longest time, nullsec was just the best at everything. And there was kind of no point to do anything other than that, unless you were interested in mission running. But if you were doing anything else, nullsec sort of eclipsed everything in terms of reward. And the risk was, it was almost safer if you joined one of the larger groups. And so that's kind of a huge problem. That's why we have fights that go up to 30% of the server in one system. So it's an interesting way that CCP are doing it. I think they've hit the nail on the head on a few things, and I think they've thrown the nail into the wall a few times as well. But it's a process, and they are committed to iterating on it as we've seen throughout the year. So I'm hopeful.
All right, we're buffering pretty bad. I don't know if that's overall Twitch problem or McLeod. Is that a England problem?
I'm told it's a Twitch problem.
So Twitch is having a tough time right now. Okay, we'll try to finish. Hopefully we can finish. If not, we'll put out a written statement Okay, another thing, so that's resource distribution. Pokven as an overall game change.
Pachven.
Pachven.
All right.
What do you think?
All right, so after the Triglavian invasions, the 27 systems that the Triglavians were able to change to final liminality, to progress to final liminality, got disconnected from the gate network and then connected to their own internal Triglavian gate network. Now, these gates only allow you to jump through the gates between systems if you have a high enough Triglavian standing, and that is 1.0 for border systems between the two constellations, 3.0 for internal systems, or 7.0 to jump into the home system for each clade. Inside of Pachven are anomalies to fight rogue drones, drifters, Triglavians, or Edencom. And you can get a lot of salvage and rewards for doing so. It's quite profitable. World Arcs are also in Pachven, which is you fight a boatload of Triglavians for quite a big reward. Obviously, it is basically like hipster wormholes. So like bubbles and bombs and such now work. They didn't when it was final liminality, but they do now work like normal. And they have unique wormhole mechanics in that you can always find a wormhole to a specific Pachven system within 3 jumps of the system, within 3 jumps of where it used to be on the map. So like Skarkon, for instance, that was in Molten Heath, you can find wormholes within 3 jumps in Molten Heath or within 3 jumps of Ethereum Reach where it connected to. So you can find it in like L4X, or you can find it in, Altar. So you always have a way of getting into Pachven systems. So like it's a wormhole system that you can always find. Also with these wormholes, when the wormhole opens up in a system, Triglavians will roam that system. So you always see Triglavians like camping in perimeter. Those are because a Pachven wormhole has opened up in perimeter. The Caldari state was hit particularly hard because the Caldari NPCs were too weak during the invasions. So you'll see a lot of Triglavians in Caldari space. Perimeter will always have this problem from now on because it's basically like something like 60% chance for like multiple wormholes to be open at the same time in perimeter, like, or within the same week in perimeter or something. Like perimeter is close to like 3 or 4 different systems that went to Pachven. So it's very likely to have Triglavians in it because they run around the system whenever there's a wormhole open in the system. Now these wormholes can open in high, like that the wormholes that are based on location can open